The napkin was still damp, cranberry sauce blotting its corner like dried blood. They had tossed it beside my plate, half folded, half crushed, like I wasn't supposed to notice, but I did. I noticed everything. The way she leaned in and whispered it behind her smile. "She's just here for the free food." It wasn't the words. It was the quiet ease in her voice, as if I wasn't even real anymore. My hands didn't shake from age. They shook, because I finally understood. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Comment below. I live in a small beige house on the edge of town, the kind with creaky porch steps and lilacs that bloom too early. It's not much, but it's mine. I've been here for 42 years, long enough to watch the maple in the front yard grow from a stick to a soldier, its limbs spreading wider than any hug I've gotten in the last few years. I'm 78 this winter. The doctor says my heart is strong. My knees disagree. Social Security keeps the lights on. Medicare covers most of the rest. And when I open my fridge, I still whisper a thank you to the man who taught me how to stretch soup into supper. My husband, Harold, passed 4 winters ago. We met at a church potluck. He offered me a deviled egg and said it wasn't as good as his mama's. I laughed. He blushed. We danced slow that night, and for 38 years after, we never stopped. He built the deck out back. I laid every stone in the garden. We raised our son Jacob here, through skinned knees, spelling bees, and prom night nerves. Our kitchen was never big, but it held more memories than most mansions. That old oven burned half the biscuits I ever made, but no one complained. Not when Harold was humming and Jacob was licking the spoon. Now that kitchen is quiet, except when the clock chimes. Jacob moved out after college, first to a big city, then back here when Natalie came into the picture. She had shiny hair and shiny shoes, and she called me Maureen instead of Mom from the beginning. I didn't mind. Not everyone's meant for closeness. Still, I always made space at the table, just in case. They have 3 children now. My grandchildren. Beautiful, busy, always growing creatures who once begged for my cookies, and now barely look up from their phones when I walk in. Lily, the oldest, used to braid my hair when I sat on the porch. She's 13 now, tall, quiet, already slipping away. Natalie hosts Thanksgiving now. It used to be mine. I'd brine the turkey, mash the potatoes, bake 4 kinds of pie, because Jacob loved the apple and Harold wanted the pecan. There was laughter, spilled wine, and Harold carving the turkey with a wink. I'd press my warm cheek to his arm and smile. Now there's a caterer. Tall metal trays, hired help in white shirts. No smell of food in the house, just a faint chemical clean and the distant beep of reheated stuffing. They invite me every year. Natalie sends a polite text, short and punctuated. Dinner at 3. Bring Lily's sweater. I reply with a heart. She never sends one back. Last year, I brought my cranberry chutney, spent 2 hours dicing oranges, simmering cloves. I placed it carefully on the buffet. I watched as no one touched it. Later, I found it in the trash, the lid still closed. This year, I didn't bring anything. I arrived in my Sunday dress, the one with the loose buttons that Harold once said made me glow. I wore his wedding ring around my neck, not for them to see, just for me to feel. Natalie greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Glad you made it," she said, brushing past. Jacob was busy setting the stereo. The kids were upstairs, screaming at a video game. I found a chair near the window, the kind you drag in when guests arrive, but don't plan to talk to. The house was full. People from Natalie's side mostly. Her sister with the loud laugh. Her mother with the fur coat. I knew no one. I folded my hands and smiled when people walked by. I watched the trays come out, steam rising like ghosts. I waited to be called up to eat. I waited to be seen. I was neither. Someone handed me a plate, one of the cheap paper ones with a floral rim. Not even a real plate, though I had a dozen in my own cupboard from Thanksgivings past. No fork, just a plastic spoon tucked into a napkin. I sat, balancing it on my knees. I didn't eat. Not yet. And then I heard it. Natalie, by the sink, whispering to her friend in a laugh-soft voice, "She's just here for the free food." I didn't move. My spine straightened, my face stayed soft, but inside, something shifted. I wasn't angry. Anger is loud. What I felt was quieter. A kind of grieving I didn't know had a name, because I wasn't just here for the free food. I was the one who taught Jacob how to bless it. I was the one who made it, year after year, with cracked hands and a full heart. They forgot. Or worse, they remembered, and just didn't care. I looked down at that paper plate in my lap, heavy with food I didn't recognize, served by hands that didn't know my name. And I thought, how strange, to be a stranger at your own family's table. That moment, that quiet hum inside my chest, it would stay with me. It didn't rage, it didn't roar, it simply whispered like wind through the maple outside. You don't belong here anymore, but maybe, just maybe, that's not a loss. After that Thanksgiving, something inside me quieted. Not in defeat, not yet, but like the settling of dust after something precious has been dropped. You know, that moment after the sound of the break, when silence walks in and stays for tea. I still saw them, of course. Birthdays, school recitals, the odd Sunday lunch. Natalie would text, short and crisp. 1 p.m., bring fruit. I'd arrive 5 minutes early, always with something homemade. Banana bread, strawberry cobbler, even a simple salad with dressing I whisked myself. And every time, I watched it sit untouched. They never said not to bring food, but no one reached for it. They chose the store-bought tray instead. Pre-cut, pre-labeled, safe. Jacob, my Jacob. He still hugged me, but it was the kind of hug you give your coat before putting it away. Necessary, brief, thoughtless. He used to come by every Sunday after church. We'd sip tea on the porch. He'd ask about my knees, my garden. He used to look me in the eye. Now he sends photos of the kids instead. Busy week, Mom. He texts, next Sunday for sure. But next never seems to come. And it's not just Jacob. It's the children too. Lily, Jonah, little Maisie. When they were small, they'd tumble into my lap, hair smelling of sun and peanut butter. Lily would help me shell peas. Jonah liked to stir. Maisie just wanted to be held. Now they sit with iPads and earbuds. I speak, but I'm background noise, white noise, grandma noise. At Lily's last birthday, they rented a bouncy castle and hired a magician. I brought a scrapbook I made, each page a memory, a moment, a miracle. I waited for her to open it. She didn't. Natalie said she'd look at it later. I saw it still in the bag when I left. And still, I smiled, because that's what I'd taught myself to do. A lifetime of keeping the peace, of saying, it's okay, even when it wasn't. Of swallowing the ache like dry bread, no butter. But it wasn't just about the food, or the gifts, or the lack of space at the table. It was the accumulation. Small humiliations, tucked between moments like sharp stones and soft shoes. At Christmas, they gave me a cardigan, 2 sizes too small. No tag, no receipt. I pretended it fit, wrapping it tight over my blouse while Natalie looked away. In spring, they cleaned their garage and dropped off a box of things I might like. Old mugs, a broken lamp, a calendar from 2 years ago. No note, just left it by my door. At Jonah's school concert, they didn't save me a seat. I stood at the back between 2 strangers, straining to see a child who didn't wave back, and through it all, I kept shrinking. Not in size, but in presence. Like a painting slowly turned to face the wall, still there, but unseen. Sometimes, in the quiet of my home, I'd whisper to Harold, "Can you see me?" I'd ask the room, "Would you still know my laugh if you heard it?" There was no answer, of course, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the groan of old wood settling. I didn't blame them. Not really. Not fully. People move on. Priorities change. The world runs faster than old legs can follow. But still, there's a particular kind of ache that only comes when the ones you love Forget how to love you back. And then came the church fundraiser. Every spring, our church hosts a supper. Part bake sale, part potluck, all heart. I've made pies for it since I was young, before Jacob, before Harold. It's where I first sold my lemon bars, the recipe passed down from my mother. This year, I signed up like always. Wrote, Maureen, 3 apple pies on the clipboard in blue ink. I arrived early, pies in hand, steam still curling from the edges. I placed them on the table beside a tray of cookies, smiling at the familiar sight. But an hour later, I saw it. Natalie, standing with a group of women by the punch bowl, her hand waving lazily toward the table. She brings them every year, she said. People feel bad, so they take a slice, but they always throw the rest away. Too much cinnamon or something. She laughed then, light, airy, like it didn't cost anything to be so careless. They all laughed with her. I didn't say a word. I just walked to the pies, picked up my 3 tins, and took them home. That night, I ate a slice by myself, each bite sticky and sweet and full of something I couldn't name. Not pride, not sadness, maybe just finality. I wrapped the rest and brought them to the shelter the next morning. The lady at the counter thanked me like I mattered. She even took a bite while I was standing there, said it was the best pie she'd ever had. I cried in the parking lot. Not because of what Natalie said, but because someone saw me. The day it truly broke wasn't a holiday, not a birthday, not an anniversary, not even a Sunday supper. It was a Wednesday. Gray, drizzling, the kind of afternoon when even the birds seemed too tired to sing. I'd been asked, or rather assigned, to watch the children while Natalie and Jacob attended a dinner party. No invitation extended to me, of course. Just a quick call, not even from Jacob. Natalie's voice on the line, brisk and hollow. Can you come by at 5? We'll be out late. No, thank you. No, how are you? Just an expectation. I hesitated, then said yes, because saying no still felt foreign to my tongue. I baked lasagna that afternoon, the kind with bechamel, the one Jacob used to beg for on his birthday. I packed it carefully, along with garlic bread and a small peach crumble for dessert. I even ironed my blouse, the one with the tiny blue flowers, thinking maybe this time. Maybe. When I arrived, the children barely looked up. Lily had her earbuds in. Jonah grunted hello. Maisie was napping. The house smelled of perfume and cold coffee. I set the food down in the kitchen, but there was already takeout on the counter. Chinese, half-eaten, forgotten. I reheated the lasagna anyway, laid out plates, called them over. No one came. Not hungry, Lily mumbled, eyes glued to her screen. Jonah shook his head. We had pizza at school. Maisie just cried for her mom. So I sat there, alone, at a table set for 5. The lasagna cooled, the bread went stiff, the peach crumble stayed covered. I didn't cry, I didn't sigh, I just sat. And then, at exactly 8:32 p.m., Natalie returned. Her heels clicked across the floor. Jacob followed, phone in hand, barely glancing at me. Oh, Natalie said, noticing the food. You didn't have to cook. We told them to fend for themselves. I opened my mouth, then closed it. She walked past me, peeled the foil from the crumble, sniffed it, then dropped the cover back down like it offended her. You still use real sugar? She asked, already walking away. You know how bad that is, right? She didn't wait for an answer. Jacob kissed Maisie's head, scrolled something on his phone, and gave me a distracted, "Thanks, Mom." That was it. Not a single bite of the food I'd poured my afternoon into. Not a single question about how I'd gotten there or how I was getting home. The rain had started again, a soft, steady tapping on the windows, like fingers reminding me of everything I didn't say. I stood there, my hands folded in front of me like a guest, unsure if she should excuse herself. And then I did. I walked to the kitchen, packed up the lasagna, the bread, the crumble, not in anger, but in quiet finality. I didn't slam drawers or sigh for effect. I just moved. Natalie watched from the couch, glass in hand. You can leave it if you want, she said. We might eat it tomorrow. I looked at her, really looked, and I realized she didn't mean harm. Not really. But she didn't see me, not as a woman, not as a mother, not even as a person, not fully. To her, I was utility, background, a presence that filled a role, not a heart. I carried the food to the car, the rain soaked my shoes. I drove home in silence, the warmth of the lasagna fogging up the windows. When I got inside, I placed everything on my own table, set one plate, lit a small candle, ate the lasagna slowly, each bite a soft defiance. Halfway through, I looked up at the photograph on the mantel, me and Harold, smiling in the sunlight, our faces younger and fuller and bursting with joy. And I whispered to him, "I don't think they love me anymore." The words cracked something open, not because they were new, but because they were finally said out loud. I'd spent years justifying, explaining, excusing. They're busy, they're tired, they don't mean it. But love, I realized, shouldn't need so much defending. Love doesn't forget your birthday. Love doesn't mock your pies. Love doesn't hand you paper plates when you built the table. And sitting there, in the quiet of my little kitchen, I felt the full weight of the truth settle in. I was not part of their family anymore. I was part of their schedule, a convenience. A warm body who could babysit or bring fruit salad or take photos at recitals. I wasn't seen, I wasn't cherished, I was tolerated. And that was the deepest betrayal of all. Because I had given my life to them, my son, my love, my Sundays, my years. And they had taken it, slowly, like someone sipping tea they didn't pay for, never noticing when the cup ran dry. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the drawer by the sink, pulled out my old recipe book, stained, worn, pages falling out, and laid it flat. I wrote my name inside the front cover again. Just Maureen, not Mom, not Grandma, just me. For the first time in a long, long while, I let that be enough. The morning after the lasagna evening, the sky was clear for the first time in days. The maple tree in my yard, the one Harold planted, had dropped half its leaves overnight, scattering gold across the lawn like blessings, or apologies. I stepped outside with my cup of tea, wrapped in a shawl that once belonged to my mother. The air was sharp with that in-between feeling. Not quite winter, not quite done with fall. And somewhere in that quiet moment, standing barefoot on the porch, I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not sorrow, just space. There's a kind of clarity that only comes after long silence, when the noise of trying, explaining, apologizing finally quiets. And in its place, you hear yourself breathing again. I went back inside and opened my recipe book. It was old, worn, corners bent, flour still caked into some of the pages. On the inside cover, I had written my name again the night before. Maureen. Just Maureen. And as I ran my fingers over that ink, I thought, maybe this isn't an ending. Maybe it's a homecoming. There was a time, after Harold lost his job in '87, when I cooked out of necessity and stubbornness. I started making boxed lunches for 2 of the nearby factories. Pies, soups, sandwiches stacked neat in wax paper. Word spread. For 2 years, I ran that little kitchen out of our garage, waking up at 4 a.m., hands raw from chopping, soul fed by the quiet purpose of it all. I still had the apron, still had the ledger, tucked in a drawer beneath my birth certificate and Harold's folded obituary. I pulled it out. Each page was handwritten, deliveries made, ingredients used, checks collected. My handwriting was stronger then, firmer, like I hadn't learned how to hesitate yet. I stared at it for a long while. And then I made tea. Not to soothe myself, but to plan. I didn't tell anyone. Not Jacob, not the children, not even Martha from down the street. It wasn't a rebellion. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. I took the bus downtown and visited a small bakery I remembered from years back. The owner, Claire, was around my Lily's age, maybe younger. She had tattoos on her arms and wore her hair in a messy bun that somehow looked intentional. I asked if she needed help in the kitchen. She looked surprised. You mean volunteering? No, I said. I mean cooking, baking, whatever you need. I used to run a little kitchen of my own. I know my way around a measuring cup. She smiled then, wide and real. Come in on Thursday. You can show me what you've got. So I did. That Thursday, I arrived in my old sneakers and Harold's army jacket. I tied my apron, rolled up my sleeves, and made a batch of apple turnovers that sold out before noon. Claire clapped when the last one left the tray. By the next week, she had me doing the Saturday morning muffins. No one there cared how old I was. No one called me mom or grandma. I was Maureen, the woman who made the orange cranberry scones and kept the cinnamon rolls from burning. I began walking taller. Not because someone told me I mattered, but because I finally remembered it myself. Back home, I started putting my recipes into order: index cards, binder clips, neat little categories. I even typed a few on the old computer I rarely used. Not for anyone else, just for me. I'd cook at the bakery in the morning, come home in the afternoon, and spend the evenings writing. And in that rhythm, something inside me healed. I stopped checking my phone for texts that never came, stopped waiting to be invited, or thanked, or needed. And instead, I began to choose myself. One evening, while walking home from the bakery, I passed the town's event board near the library. A flyer fluttered in the breeze. Looking for local vendors for community winter feast. Homemade food welcome. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I pulled a pen from my purse and under name of business, I wrote, Maureen's Table. Simple, honest, mine. I didn't want to build an empire. I didn't need to be famous. I just wanted to be real again. The next day, I signed up for a booth. 2 pies, 3 dozen rolls, and my butternut squash soup. Claire offered to help me with packaging. We spent the afternoon laughing over label designs. I chose one with a little maple leaf, the symbol of the tree I had watered through seasons of storm and sun. The tree Harold planted when we bought the house, long before the silences, the slights, the sadness. The tree that stood tall, even now. I looked out my window that night, soup simmering on the stove, pie crust cooling on the counter. I thought about Natalie's whisper. She's just here for the free food. And for the first time, I smiled. Because she was right. I was here for the food. Not theirs. Mine. The day of the winter feast came quietly. No fanfare, no banners. Just the soft crunch of snow under boots and the smell of cinnamon drifting through the cold morning air. I arrived early, before the other vendors, bundled in my thick coat and wool gloves. Claire met me at the entrance with 2 cardboard boxes and a grin so wide it nearly warmed the frost off the sidewalk. Your booth is by the library steps, she said, right where the sun lands first. I smiled and nodded, though my hands trembled slightly. Not from the cold, from something deeper. The quiet kind of nervous that comes when you're doing something for yourself for the first time in years. We unpacked the soup first, glass jars with twine bows, each labeled Maureen's Table, butternut squash with sage. Then came the rolls, warm and soft, nestled in linen. Last were the pies, 2 apple, 1 pecan, and a cranberry custard that Claire insisted I try. The tablecloth was simple, white with tiny embroidered corners, one I'd sewn decades ago for Harold's birthday. I laid it down gently, smoothing the creases with my palm. Then I stood behind the table, took a breath, and waited. And people came, one by one, then in pairs. Strangers mostly, townsfolk I hadn't seen in years. A woman I used to see at church. A retired teacher who remembered Jacob from 2nd grade. Are you Maureen? They'd ask, holding a jar of soup or sniffing the rolls. Yes, I'd say, smiling. Yes, I am. They bought everything, every jar, every pie, every roll. Some came back for seconds. Some asked if I'd be back next week. By noon, only crumbs remained. I sat for a moment, sipping tea from my thermos, feeling something inside me settle, not with exhaustion, but satisfaction. Like I'd finally stood up, even if no one noticed, even if no one clapped. But someone did notice. Lily. I didn't see her approach. She wore a red scarf, too big for her neck, and her boots looked new. She stood across the square for a long time, just watching, and then, slowly, she walked over. "Grandma?" I looked up, heart caught in my throat. She glanced at the empty trays. "You made all this?" I nodded. "Sold out." She picked up one of the labels from the table, reading it aloud. "Maureen's table." "That's your name," she said, as if remembering. "It is," I answered gently. She looked down, then back at me. "Mom said you were too tired to cook anymore." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Lily pulled out her phone. "Can I take a picture of you here, with the table?" I nodded. She snapped the photo, then looked at me again, quieter now. "Can I help next time?" Something in my chest bloomed. "You can," I said softly. "If you want to." She smiled. Not the fake one kids learn to give when adults tell jokes, but a real one. The kind that curves all the way to the eyes. When she walked away, she turned back and waved. I stayed there a while longer, long after the sun dipped behind the church steeple. Watching the shadows stretch, hearing the last of the vendors pack up, I thought about the woman who had whispered that I was only there for the food. And I realized something. They had taken so much, my traditions, my place at the table, my voice, but they couldn't take what they never truly saw. They never saw my grit, my roots, my quiet fire. That night, I got a call from Claire. Her voice was bright with energy. "A woman from the mayor's office came by," she said. "She loved your soup. Wants to talk about catering the retirement luncheon next month." I blinked. "Me?" "You," she laughed. "She asked for the lady with the sage squash jars." I pressed my hand to my chest, not to still my heart, but to honor it. Because for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt found. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, put on my robe, made coffee, and sat by the window. The maple tree stood bare now, branches thin and proud against the silver sky. And in that stillness, I wrote something down. A list. Not of groceries, not chores. A list of names. Women I had been. Maureen, the daughter who peeled apples for her mother's pies. Maureen, the young bride who danced in Harold's arms until her shoes fell off. Maureen, the mother who folded Jacob's tiny socks and stitched lullabies into every seam. Maureen, the widow who learned how to sleep on one side of the bed. Maureen, the forgotten guest at her own family's table. And now, Maureen, the woman who cooked for a town and sold every bite. One name, many lives, and each one mattered. I folded the paper and tucked it into my recipe book between the pie crust and soup pages. My table may no longer be inside their house, but it was mine, and it was full. The thing about heartache is that it rarely begins where you think it does. Natalie's whisper hurt. Of course it did. But that wasn't the first time I'd been made to feel small in a room I had helped build. That wasn't the first time love turned its face away from me. I was 9 years old the first time I understood what it meant to be invisible. We were in my mother's kitchen, cramped, always too warm, with peeling linoleum and a clock that never kept the right time. She was boiling cabbage that day. The smell lingered in my hair for hours. My older brothers sat at the table, arguing over something petty, baseball cards, I think. My father had just come in from work, his boots still caked with mud. I stood by the counter, holding the small paper I'd worked on all week. My teacher had written across the top in red ink, "Excellent, Maureen, your best yet." I had drawn our house, crooked roof and all, with crayons so dull I had to press hard just to leave a mark. But I had poured my heart into that drawing. The windows, the garden, even the cracked sidewalk. I'd drawn the curtains just like the ones Mama sewed. I walked over to my father, the paper trembling in my hand. "Look what I made," I said, tilting it toward him. He didn't look up, just waved his hand and said, "Set the table, Maureen." I stood there a moment longer, waiting, hoping. "Did you hear me?" he snapped. So I set the table. I folded the paper and tucked it under my sleeve. That night, I threw it in the wood stove. Mama didn't say a word. She never did. She was quiet like that, not from peace, but from exhaustion. Life had wrung the song out of her. I think she learned early that speaking up cost more than it gave. I used to watch her serve every plate, fill every glass, wipe every mouth. And yet, she was never served first, always last, or not at all. One Christmas, when the ham ran short, she simply said, "I'm not hungry tonight," and gave her portion to my father. That was the night I decided, I will not be like her. But I was. I grew into her same quiet habits, her same folding of self. I learned to offer before being asked, to apologize before offense was taken. I learned to expect little and be grateful for less. Even with Harold, as loving as he was, I often found myself waiting for thanks, for help, for recognition that never came. And when Jacob was born, I poured all of myself into him, hoping he'd see what my father hadn't, hoping I could raise a child who noticed things. For a while, he did. When he was little, he'd leave me daisies plucked from the yard or drawings of our house with hearts in the windows. He'd call me his best girl and beg for my stories. But as he grew, I saw the world pull at him, the need to fit, to impress, to succeed. And slowly, quietly, I saw the same blindness settle in his eyes, not out of cruelty, but out of custom. Boys are not taught to notice women who serve without asking. And I had served. All my life, the meals, the birthdays, the broken hearts and scraped knees, I had served in silence, and so I became invisible, just as my mother had. It's funny in a way, the very thing I swore I'd never become. I became without even realizing, until that whisper, "She's just here for the free food." That one sentence brought it all back. The ignored drawing, the untouched pies, the cardigan 2 sizes too small, a lifetime of small dismissals, each one stacking like bricks in a wall I didn't know I'd built. But walls can protect just as much as they can imprison. And in remembering, I saw something else too. The strength in my mother's silence, the dignity in her sacrifice. She didn't speak because she didn't believe she could. I didn't speak because I forgot that I should. But now I knew better. I couldn't go back and change the way she folded herself into corners. I couldn't bring back that little girl with the crayon drawing and the bright eyes. But I could see her. I could hold her hand, mine now wrinkled and worn, and say, "You matter." And I could choose differently. I could stand, gently, quietly, and take up space. I could feed people, not to be thanked, but because it brought me joy. I could write my name, not for approval, but for remembrance. Maureen. Just Maureen. Not an echo of my mother, not a shadow of my son's needs, not a ghost at someone else's table. A woman. Whole, weathered, wiser, and still very much here. The letter came folded in thirds, tucked between a Medicare statement and a flyer for hearing aids. At first glance, I thought it was junk mail, one of those generic notices printed on stiff paper meant to look official. But when I unfolded it, the words took shape slowly, like fog lifting to reveal something you'd rather not see. It was a confirmation. A change had been made to my healthcare proxy, the person legally authorized to make decisions for me if I couldn't. And it wasn't me. It wasn't even someone I'd spoken to about such things. It was Natalie. I read the letter 3 times, each word sharper than the last. It said the change had been submitted online, confirmed by phone, and finalized 3 weeks ago. No one had told me. No one had asked. I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter fluttering in my hand like a frightened bird. My name was there, in bold. But the decision wasn't mine. They'd taken my voice, and I hadn't even noticed. I called the number on the letter. The woman on the line was polite, efficient. "Yes," she said. "You've been assigned a new proxy, Natalie Green." I cleared my throat. "She's my daughter-in-law." "Well, it's all official," she said. "You can, of course, reverse the decision if you'd like to file the proper paperwork." I hung up. Did I want to reverse it? Yes, but more than that, I wanted to understand. Why? That evening, I called Jacob. Not Natalie, not the children, just him. He picked up on the third ring. Hey, Mom, everything okay? I got a letter, I said, about my healthcare proxy. He hesitated, just long enough for truth to slide between us. Oh, he said. Yeah, Natalie took care of that. She didn't ask me. She just thought it made sense in case something happened. She's not my daughter. She's family. I was silent. I mean, you've said yourself things are getting harder. You forget things sometimes. I forgot to bring home my Tupperware. That's not the same as forgetting myself. He chuckled softly. Mom, it's not a big deal. But it was, because it wasn't just paperwork. It wasn't just a line on a form. It was erasure. It was the quiet assumption that I was no longer capable of making decisions about my own body, my own life. And worse, that I wouldn't notice. I thanked him as politely as I could. Then I hung up. I didn't cry. I just sat in the silence of my little home and let the betrayal settle like dust in the corners. Familiar, unwanted, hard to sweep away. Later that week, I went to the guest room, the one that used to be Jacob's, the one where I now kept boxes of things too important to throw away, yet too painful to keep close. I found the deed there, the official paper for my house, folded neatly in the same folder as Harold's will, my birth certificate, and the letter he wrote me on our 30th anniversary. I checked it again, like I had every few years. Yes, my name was still there, alone, no cosigners, no shared ownership, just me. For now. I wrapped the folder in a cloth napkin and placed it under my mattress. Not because I feared they would steal it, but because I needed to feel it beneath me. Real. Solid. Mine. The next day, I visited a small legal office downtown, one I'd passed many times but never entered. I brought the letter and the folder. The man behind the desk was young, patient, his tie too long, his handshake kind. He helped me fill out the reversal form. I named Lily as my new proxy, not because I expected her to need it, but because I trusted her to ask me first. He notarized it, filed it, sent it in. Before I left, he looked at me. Do you want to name a secondary? I shook my head. No, just her. He nodded. You're all set, Maureen. I smiled. For the first time in days, outside, the wind had picked up. It rustled the trees and tugged at my coat, but I stood still, letting it pass around me like a wave that no longer had power to pull me under. I thought of all the little things they'd taken, piece by piece. My pies, my place at the table, my say in my own life. And I thought, they only took what I allowed, because I hadn't said no, not once, until now. That evening, I opened my kitchen cabinet and saw the blue ceramic pie dish, the one I'd brought to last year's Thanksgiving, the one they said they couldn't find when I asked for it back. I'd spotted it online the night before, listed on a neighborhood sale group. $10, no description. Just a photo, unmistakable in its chipped corner and painted rim. I bought it back, met the woman in the grocery store parking lot, paid in cash, smiled when she handed it over. As I held it in my lap, the cashier's voice echoing in the background, I felt something I hadn't in months. Pride, not in the dish, but in myself. Because in that moment, I wasn't broken, I wasn't lost. I was reclaiming. Piece by quiet piece. I didn't announce my absence. There was no message, no explanation, no long-winded goodbye. I simply stopped showing up. It began with Jonah's soccer game. The invitation came, as they always did, in the form of a text. Short, half-hearted, as if typed while doing something else. Jonah's game, Saturday, 2 p.m., same field. No greeting, no punctuation, just information passed like a grocery list. I didn't reply. Saturday came, and I stayed home. I brewed tea, folded laundry, watched the birds flit between the maple tree and the feeder. I didn't feel guilt, only a soft, unexpected calm. The next week brought Lily's chorus concert. Same invitation, same tone. And again, I didn't respond. Not out of anger, not in protest, but because I was beginning to understand something. You don't have to go where you're only tolerated. You don't have to sit in the back row in a cold plastic chair watching children you once rocked pretend not to see you. You don't have to earn love that should have been given freely. So I stayed home. And something strange happened. The world didn't end. No one called, no one asked why I wasn't there. They moved on without me, as they had already begun to do long before I noticed. And that, oddly enough, brought relief. There's a quiet kind of freedom in realizing you were never the center of someone's circle. It lets you stop spinning around them. I began creating a new rhythm. My mornings were for baking, pies, rolls, muffins for the cafe, and the occasional church luncheon. My afternoons were for walking, writing, sometimes sitting beneath the old maple tree with a blanket and a thermos of soup. Evenings I spent with books, or sewing, or listening to the hum of the house I had lived in longer than I had ever lived anywhere else. The silence no longer hurt. It became a friend. One that didn't ask for anything. One that didn't make me explain myself. I stopped offering to bring dishes to their gatherings, stopped asking for photos from events I hadn't been invited to, stopped waiting for them to remember me. Instead, I remembered myself. One afternoon, while dusting the mantel, I came across a framed photo, our family at Jacob's wedding. Everyone dressed in soft colors, bouquets in hand, smiling wide. I looked closer. There I was, off to the side. Not in the front, not in the center. Barely there. A placeholder. A presence. I took the photo down and placed it in a drawer. Not out of bitterness, but because I was ready to decorate my home with memories that saw me fully. In its place, I set a picture Lily had taken at the winter feast. Me, behind my table, hands folded in front of me, pies in neat rows, smile soft, but real. That was me. Maureen, not mom, not grandma, not a +1 to their lives, just me. One week, Natalie texted, "Jonah's birthday dinner, 6 p.m., bring ice cream." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed, "I won't be attending, but thank you for thinking of me." That was all. No excuse, no apology. And I didn't hear back, not a single word. But I felt lighter. Because there's dignity in silence, in not explaining yourself to people who never asked how you felt in the first place. I made a peach cobbler that night, using the last of the summer fruit I'd frozen in August. I ate it warm, on my porch, while the sun folded itself into the horizon like it had nothing left to prove. The air was quiet. And so was I. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't quiet because I had no one to talk to. I was quiet because I no longer needed to be heard by them to feel real. Later, I went to my bookshelf and found an old journal. The pages were yellowed, the spine cracked. I wrote, "Today, I chose not to go." And it felt like choosing myself. No celebration, no parade. Just a woman, in a house, learning how to stop begging for crumbs from a table she once built. They hadn't pushed me out. I had simply stopped pulling myself in. It was a Thursday when Lily knocked on my door. Late afternoon, the sun low and lazy, casting long shadows across the porch. I had just pulled a tray of oatmeal cookies from the oven, the kind with molasses and raisins, soft in the middle, crisp at the edges. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door slowly. There she was, taller than I remembered, her hair longer, face half hidden beneath a blue hoodie. She held something in her arms. A notebook, maybe. A school binder. Her boots were muddy. "Hi," she said. I blinked, unsure. I was just walking back from practice, thought I'd stop by. Practice. I hadn't known she played anything. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She kicked off her boots and followed me to the kitchen. The scent of cookies hung in the air. I motioned to the table. She sat, tugging her sleeves down over her hands the way she used to when she was nervous as a little girl. "I saw your picture," she said after a while, "at the cafe. Mom stopped in last week. She didn't know it was you behind the pies." I smiled softly. "Most people don't." She said, "You've been busy." "I have." A pause. "I think that's cool," she said, glancing up. "That you're doing something." Something. Such a small word, but in her voice it held weight. Respect. I poured her some tea, set out 2 cookies. We sat in the soft hum of the afternoon. No rush, no expectations. She took a bite and smiled. Still the best cookies I've ever had. We talked, not about anything big, just school, her favorite teacher, the way she sometimes sits in the library during lunch because the cafeteria is too loud. She reminded me of myself more than I ever realized. Then she pulled the notebook closer and opened it. "I've been writing stuff," she said. "For English. We're doing personal stories." She showed me a page, her handwriting neat, deliberate. The title read, "My Grandma's Table." I felt my breath catch. She had written about the winter feast, how she saw me there, how proud I looked, how different I seemed from the quiet woman sitting in the corner at family dinners. She wrote, "There was a light around her that day, not because people saw her, but because she saw herself." I blinked slowly, letting the words soak into the parts of me that still believed I had disappeared. "She asked us to write about someone who surprised us," Lily said. "And I picked you." I reached across the table and took her hand, not because she needed it, but because I did. "Thank you," I whispered. We sat like that a while, her hand warm, mine trembling just a little. Before she left, she asked if she could help me sometime, with baking or labeling or setting up at the next event. "I want to learn," she said. "Not just the recipes. I want to learn from you." And that, more than any apology, more than any seat at any table, filled the hollow places inside me. That night, I pulled out my recipe book and slid her story between the pages, not as a trophy, but as a seed. The next morning, I began rewriting my recipes, not for a business, not for show, but for her. I wrote them by hand, neat, simple, 1 per card. I included little notes in the margins. "This one tastes better if you hum while stirring. Don't rush the dough. It needs time like people do." And at the top of every one, I wrote, "Maureen's Table," passed on to Lily. It was my legacy, wrapped in flour and cinnamon. Not just food, but proof. Proof that I had lived, loved, taught, that I mattered. The next few Saturdays, Lily came early. We worked side by side, kneading dough, stirring soups, tying twine on jam jars. She asked questions, took notes, got flour on her nose. And we laughed. Not the loud kind, but the kind that stays in your chest like warmth. She was my ally, not because she had power, but because she saw mine. She didn't fix anything. She simply made space for me to be full again, and in doing so, she filled something in herself too. One afternoon, she brought a photo she'd printed, the one from the cafe, of me behind my table. "I want to hang this in my room," she said. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, because I knew then I had not lost everything. I had simply come home to myself. The invitations began to change, not the tone, still short, still stiff, but the frequency. At first, there were fewer, a skipped update, a missed reminder. Then, suddenly, there were none. No texts about birthday dinners, no calls for help with school drop-offs, no requests for holiday side dishes. And still, I didn't chase them, because I had already stopped being part of their plan long before they stopped pretending I was. Instead, I watched from afar. It started with whispers in town, small ones, drifting through the cafe where I brought my scones every Tuesday morning. "Did you hear Natalie's mother had another fall? She's in and out of rehab. Jacob's wife looks exhausted. Poor kids. Someone should help." I said nothing, just folded napkins and placed muffins on trays. By the end of October, I heard from Claire that the mayor's luncheon, the one my butternut squash soup had graced, had been a smashing success. She wants to order for Thanksgiving, Claire said, her eyes gleaming. From you, 3 pies and your famous stuffing. I nodded, smiling quietly. Later that week, I was sorting apples at the farmer's market when I spotted Natalie across the way. She didn't see me at first. She looked tired, hair hastily tied back, shoulders hunched in a coat too thin for the wind. She was alone. No Jacob. No children. She walked past my booth, eyes grazing the display of pies. Her gaze paused, just a second, on the label, Maureen's table, and then, just like that, she looked up and saw me. Our eyes met. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I simply smiled, small, soft, certain. She blinked, then kept walking. No words, no confrontation, but I knew. She knew who I had become, not because I told her, but because the town did. The posters, the booths, the jars with my name written in steady, proud letters. I was not just someone's mother-in-law anymore. I was Maureen. A few days later, Jacob called. I saw his name flash on the screen and let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hello, Jacob?" A pause. "I was thinking, it's been a while. Thought maybe you'd come for Thanksgiving this year. We're not doing anything big. Just family." I didn't respond right away. He filled the silence. "Natalie's mom isn't up for hosting. She's not doing well." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. And I meant it. Another pause. "I know things have been strained," he added, "but the kids miss you." I thought of Lily's visits, the stories, the pies we'd made side by side just last weekend. "They know where to find me," I said gently. He exhaled, as if surprised by my steadiness. "Are you coming then?" I closed my eyes, thought of the crumpled napkin, the paper plate, the whisper that started it all. "No," I said, "not this year." Another silence. He didn't argue, didn't beg, just said, "Okay, I understand." And somehow, I believed he did. Because sometimes the consequences of our actions don't come with fireworks or apologies. Sometimes they come with a quiet, "okay," and the hollow that follows. That Thanksgiving, I set my own table. 3 chairs. One for me, one for Lily, and one for anyone who needed to feel welcome again. We made roast chicken, not turkey, cranberry chutney, 2 pies, and a basket of warm rolls wrapped in a towel with my initials embroidered in the corner. A wedding gift from long ago. Lily lit the candles. I poured cider. And as we sat, just the 2 of us, I felt no sadness. Only peace. Because while their table grew quieter, mine was just beginning to fill. It was the week after Thanksgiving when they came. No warning, no phone call, just the sound of tires crunching across my gravel drive, followed by a knock, not rushed, not frantic, just expectant. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. Jacob stood there, coat unbuttoned, eyes unsure. Natalie stood behind him, arms crossed, her face stiff with something halfway between apology and pride. The children weren't with them. "Hi, Mom," Jacob said. I nodded. "Come in." I stepped aside, let them pass. The kitchen still smelled of cinnamon and roasting sweet potatoes. I had been preparing care packages for the seniors at church, meals wrapped neatly, labels handwritten. They sat at the table side by side, like school children waiting for a scolding. I didn't sit. I poured tea instead, 3 cups, set them down carefully, sat only when I was ready. No one spoke for a moment. Finally, Jacob cleared his throat. "We noticed you haven't been around much." I nodded once. Natalie added, "The kids ask about you. Lily's been quiet, says you're busy." I took a sip of tea. "I am." Jacob leaned forward, his hands clasped. "I think we need to talk." "So talk," I said, calm. He looked to Natalie, who didn't meet his eyes, then back to me. "I think We hurt you, and I don't think we realized how much. I stayed quiet. Because silence, I've learned, is sometimes the only mirror strong enough to make others see themselves. Natalie spoke next, her voice softer. I'm sorry about the proxy change. I thought I was helping. I never meant to. You didn't ask, I interrupted gently. She blinked, surprised at the firmness in my tone. I didn't, she said. No, I said. And when you don't ask someone about their own life, you stop seeing them as a person. You see them as something else. She looked down at her tea. Jacob reached for his cup, then stopped. We were trying to keep things easy, he said. We didn't think. You didn't have to think, I said. You just had to see. He nodded slowly. I was there, I continued. Every birthday, every recital, every dinner where I stood in the corner, smiling. I brought pies, salads, gifts. I remembered your milestones, but none of you remembered me. Natalie looked up, tears in her eyes now, but still no words. And then, I added, you whispered, she's just here for the free food. Her face flushed. Jacob turned sharply. She said that? She did, I said without heat. And it wasn't the first time I'd been made small at your table, but it was the first time I chose to listen. The room went still. I'm not angry, I said. I'm awake. There's a difference. Jacob whispered, we miss you. I miss who we used to be, I said softly. But I don't miss being invisible. Natalie finally spoke. What do you want from us? I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see a threat or a wall. I saw a woman too wrapped in her own rhythm to notice the harm she'd caused. I don't want anything, I said. Not from you. Not anymore. She blinked fast, her chin trembling. What I want, I continued, is to be where I'm seen, where I'm invited, not as obligation, but as joy. Jacob's shoulders sagged. So what happens now? I looked out the window where the maple tree stood, bare but proud. Now, I said, I live. I bake. I share what I know with someone who asks for it. I set a table for people who want to sit beside me, not above me. And us? He asked. You're always welcome, I said, but not by default, by choice. You want me there? You ask, you include, you see. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing something he should have known all along. Natalie stood, then paused. Can I help with the meal packs? I met her eyes. Not today, I said, but maybe another time, when you mean it. She nodded, swallowed hard. They gathered their coats. I walked them to the door. Thank you for the tea, Jacob said. I smiled. Thank you for coming. And as they stepped onto the porch, I added, next time, bring Lily. They turned, surprised, hopeful. She already sees me, I said. And then I closed the door, not with finality, but with peace. Because I had spoken my truth. No shouting, no vengeance. Just a woman, once invisible, choosing to stand in the light she built for herself. The winter passed gently. There was no big change, no sweeping transformation. Just little shifts, soft as falling snow, steady as the rising sun. I still woke early, still brewed my tea in the chipped blue mug Harold once gave me. But now, I lingered longer on the porch, let the steam warm my face, let the silence hold me like an old friend. Lily came every Saturday morning. She'd knock twice, once quick, once slow, her signal that it was her and not the wind. I'd open the door, flour already on my apron, the smell of something warm floating through the house. We didn't always bake. Sometimes we sat with notebooks, me scribbling recipes, her sketching little illustrations for each dish, cinnamon sticks, rolling pins, little bowls with steam curls. Other days we gardened, our fingers buried in the earth, bulbs tucked into cold soil like promises waiting for spring. She didn't ask about the others, and I didn't speak of them unless she did. It wasn't silence out of bitterness. It was simply permission. Permission to grow something new without dragging the weight of what had once been. And yet, things did shift. Jacob started stopping by, not often, not predictably, but enough. Sometimes with tools in hand, offering to fix a squeaky door or clear the gutters. Sometimes empty-handed, just wanting to sit. He'd ask how I was, and I'd tell him. Not everything, just enough. He seemed different, softer around the edges, less rushed, as if listening had become a practice, not just a pause between his own thoughts. One afternoon, he brought Lily with him. She wore an apron this time, mine, in fact, tied clumsily around her middle, the hem almost brushing the floor. "Teach him how to fold the pie crust," she giggled. I did. We stood side by side in my little kitchen, Jacob pressing dough with unsure fingers, Lily brushing egg wash on the edges. The pie came out lopsided, slightly burnt on one side, perfect all the same. We ate it together in the living room, forks scraping plates, laughter curling in the corners like it used to. Natalie didn't come. She sent a pie tin back once, cleaned, wrapped in a linen towel. No note. But it was enough. The real change, though, was mine. I no longer waited by the window, no longer checked my phone for invitations or reminders or scraps of attention. I set my table with intention, even when I was alone, a placemat, a cloth napkin, a real plate, because I was not just someone's guest. I was the host of my own life. My small catering project began to grow, slowly, sweetly. Word of mouth spread. Orders came in, not overwhelming, but enough to keep me busy, enough to make me feel needed, but not used. Maureen's table became a name whispered in warmth. My roles at baby showers, my pies at book clubs, my soup at quiet gatherings where people held each other's stories with soft hands. Each dish I sent out felt like a note. You're not alone. You are loved. This moment matters. In March, I started a small cooking circle at the community center. 6 women, all different ages, gathered around my table with worn notebooks and eager eyes. We chopped, stirred, listened, shared. Some had lost husbands, others had lost homes. One had just moved here after a divorce. Another had never cooked more than microwave dinners. And yet, every week, we created something nourishing. Food, yes, but also belonging. Lily helped. Of course she did. She took attendance, organized recipes, even taught them how to tie apron bows so they wouldn't slip loose. One evening, after everyone had gone, she sat beside me and said, "You know, this is the kind of table I want to build when I'm older." I smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Then you'll never be hungry," I said. "Not for food, not for love, not for worth." Because the table wasn't just wood and legs. It was a space made sacred by the presence of someone who refused to vanish. A space reclaimed by a woman who was once told she was just there for the free food, and who quietly, stubbornly, sweetly proved otherwise. My house didn't get louder. It got fuller, full of intention, of joy, of days spent in the company of those who chose to see me. And more than that, a heart that finally saw herself. I keep the napkin in the drawer beside my bed. The one with the cranberry stain, soft and faded now, a memory pressed into cloth. Not out of bitterness, but because some moments are worth remembering. Not for how they hurt you, but for how they woke you up. That whisper, "She's just here for the free food," once shattered something in me. Now I see it for what it was, a turning point, a doorway I hadn't realized I needed to walk through. Because I was never just there for the food. I was there for the connection, the belonging, the joy of passing the bread and knowing I helped bake it. And when they no longer saw me, I learned to see myself again. In the oven's hum, in the crinkle of recipe pages, in the laughter of a granddaughter who said, "Teach me." I learned that dignity doesn't require permission. It simply requires a quiet reclaiming of your time, your worth, your space at the table. These days, I don't wait to be invited. I build my own table, and I fill it with those who hunger, not just for food, but for gentleness. So if you're reading this, or listening, or remembering someone who once stood at the edge of your world, Let me leave you with this. You don't have to prove your value to those who forgot it. You don't have to stay where love must be earned. You can leave quietly, kindly, and still reclaim every piece of yourself they chose not to see. Because you were never just there for the food. You were the one who knew how to feed others with love. And that is enough. If you've ever felt unseen or forgotten, remember, your worth doesn't depend on their understanding. Share your story in the comments. You're not alone, and you never were.